Hi everyone, Ryan Schrout from PC Perspective here, and we've got the dirt on NVIDIA 3D Vision Surround. NVIDIA Surround is NVIDIA's answer to the AMD Eyefinity technology that has been around since those cards' introduction this past September. Essentially, you're talking about a 3-monitor, triple display, multi-monitor gaming solution that will support monitors up to 30-inch 2560 by 1600 resolution. Now, of course, most people aren't going to be using those, so we're really going to be focusing on the 1080p 1920 by 1080 resolution displays. Now, one of the key differences for NVIDIA Surround is the requirement of an SLI configuration. You have to have a pair of graphics cards to get 3 monitors because their cards only support 2 outputs per card. This means you can have a pair of GTX 480s or GTX 470s if you want to use the newest generation. However, they are supporting backwards compatibility to the GTX 285, 280, 275, 260, and even as far back as the GTX 295 dual GPU graphics card. So that's a nice perk that they'll be able to go back and support these on older generation cards as long as you're happy with the performance and image quality you get from it. Now, obviously, because AMD's cards support 3 displays on a single card with a little bit of a hiccup we'll talk about later, you can do that with a single card at any kind of price point depending on, again, what performance and image quality you want. Also, along with NVIDIA Surround, NVIDIA is bringing out 3D Vision Surround, which is the same idea but with 3D vision capability. So instead of having standard 1080p monitors, you're actually using 1080p 3D vision 120 Hertz panels, 3 of them landscape mode across, and again requires the same SLI configurations, but you're pushing twice as many pixels for each display. And obviously you're talking about more expensive monitors, getting the glasses and that kind of stuff, but it is a very interesting technology and we're going to talk about that here today. The technology for 3D Vision Surround and just standard NVIDIA Surround is pretty impressive. So we're talking about up to 30-inch displays, which would support resolutions as high as 7680 by 1600 if you have the money and desk space for 3 30-inch displays. We're talking 12.2 million pixels per frame, and at 60 Hertz, we're talking 737 million pixels per second required of processing power. Now, when we go down to the standard, if we look at 3D Vision, which maxes out at 1080p, or actually technically 1920 by 1200, but 1080p is really kind of the sweet spot here. We're talking 5760 by 1080 resolution, 6.2 million pixels per frame, or 746 million pixels per second. That's a lot of horsepower. That's one of the benefits, or one of the reasons why it could be a benefit to have to require SLI configurations. So you are going to have a little bit more GPU horsepower in your system. Now, in terms of how it works just like we know SLI configurations and how 3D Vision has worked before. AFR, alternate frame rendering. So in an SLI configuration configured for NVIDIA Surround, each GPU renders each frame. So one GPU will do the entire 5760 by 1080 frame, and then the second GPU will do the next frame. In 3D Vision mode, it's a little bit different. Each GPU will render the left and right eye for a particular scene, and then the second GPU will do the next frame, left and right eye. So it all works kind of how you would expect it to do, no tricks or anything like that going on here, just a lot of GPU horsepower required for a lot of pixels. Setup of an NVIDIA Surround configuration is very similar to setting up an AMD Eyefinity configuration, but it doesn't make it any more or less complicated. For a standard 2D setup, you can have you have to have 3 displays rather, but you have the ability to support a 4th display that NVIDIA calls an auxiliary display. Now, this is kind of interesting because this will allow you to do 1920 by 1080 gaming in full screen mode, or if you want to play it in a windowed mode, then you can have access to that 4th display for chat, email, messaging, anything else that you would want to do. So that's kind of nice that in this configuration you have the ability to run up to 4 displays, but you can't do full screen gaming. Also, you'll be able to support portrait or landscape modes, orientations for your monitors in 2D mode. So if you want to have the portrait mode instead of landscape mode, you have that ability. It supports those custom resolutions. Now in 3D mode, there is no support for an auxiliary display because your games have to run in full screen in order to be run in 3D vision. And obviously because of the polarization methods used on the monitors and glasses and that kind of thing, landscape mode is all that is supported for right now. NVIDIA said that they're kind of looking into being able to produce monitors that will run in portrait or landscape mode, but we are not there yet. Now, running 3 displays can take up a lot of desk space, no doubt there. One of the ways you can get by that is to use a stand designed for 3 displays. We actually got one of the Ergotech branded displays, or stands rather, hooked up our 3 monitors to it. It was a fairly simple process actually. Hooking up some VESA mounts to the back of the monitor, setting up the stand, and then just clipping them on. And we had to do a little bit of finagling to get them all lined up correctly. We used a little tape on the back to block out any kind of light that might be coming through the back of the displays. But overall, it was a pretty easy process, and it did a really good job of cleaning up the desk in terms of getting all those other stands, all 3 monitor stands, pushed away, so we had access to our desks back, and that was pretty nice. And I think you can pick those stands up for about $300 or so. So more than the cost of a 2D monitor, but less than the cost of an additional 3D monitor. Now in terms of software setup, again, it was pretty easy. I think NVIDIA has been able to learn from watching some of the growing pains that AMD Eyefinity has gone through really. Hook up all 3 monitors. Once you go into the driver control panel, there's an option for physics, SLI, and surround options. When you look at that, you can easily click the button for configure a surround display. You go through the setup process, you pick your resolution, which placement each of the monitors are in, so it'll help you pick which monitors on which side, so you don't have to necessarily plug them into certain DVI ports and that kind of thing. And then obviously you have the option to do bezel correction, which is the ability to increase your resolution so that some pixels would be hidden technically behind the bezels between the 3 displays. Now, there are a lot of benefits, pros and cons to actually using that bezel correction, so we won't go into a whole lot of that right now. But what it does is allows you to easily switch between both settings by either going between, say, 5760 by 1080 or the 5950 by 1080 resolution, and all that works just like you have previously seen with the ATI technologies. And in all, I think we thought the setup of the NVIDIA surround system was pretty straightforward. Now that both ATI and NVIDIA have multi-monitor gaming support, it's time to really compare the performance between both options. Now, NVIDIA is going to have an advantage in this front because their surround gaming requires SLI configurations, pair of GTX 480s, pair of GTX 470s. They're going to have kind of an unfair advantage when we look at raw performance numbers. Because you can run 3 monitor gaming on a single 5870, but performance is going to be lower, image quality settings are going to have to be set quite a bit lower in order to get comparable frame rates and that kind of stuff. So that being said, because a single GTX 480 is higher performing than a single Radeon HD 5870, we can assume that a pair of GTX 480s is going to be much faster than a single 5870 and faster than a pair of 5870s in crossfire mode. And that turned out to be the case. So if we look at some of the benchmarks that we ran in our full written review, you look at Metro 2033, probably the toughest game on the PC right now in terms of graphics card horsepower. We ran that at 4800 by 900, which is the next kind of stepping below 5760 by 1080. And of course, we're talking about 2D numbers here. The pair of GTX 480s got about 56.8 frames a second, while the single Radeon 5870 got 26.2 frames per second. Pretty big difference there. Now, if we look at a pair of 5870s in Crossfire, they got about 41.8 frames per second. So you look at 56 versus 41, and those are, it's a pretty noticeable difference in performance for a game like that. And again, you could use, a pair of 5870s, or you could use a single 5970, but performance is going to be relatively similar between those two configurations. So that's why we're only mentioning those here. Left 4 Dead 2, another game we tested, very fun in a surround mode. The pair of GTX 480s got 141 frames per second. The single 5870 got 95 frames per second. And the 5970 or 5870 Crossfires got about 112 frames per second. So 141 versus 112 for the two card comparisons there. Batman, of course, a very heavily weighted game towards NVIDIA, but still kind of fun to play in surround mode. Got 118 frames per second on the pair of 480s versus just 63 frames per second on the pair of 5870s and only 42 frames per second on the single 5870. 3D performance, a little bit more of a question mark there. You're doubling the number of pixels that have to be rendered by the NVIDIA surround setup, by the GPUs. So that means performance is going to drop. And for the most part, we got